Hi, I'm Pam and I'm here to talk about retro video games. The game I'm reviewing today was voted on by my supporters on Patreon, and it just edged out the second place game by 1 vote. It's the sequel to one of my favorite NES games, Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics 2. Zoda's Revenge, StarTropics 2 was developed by Nintendo R&D 3 and released in 1994. It's an action-adventure game that continues the story of Mike Jones and his archaeologist uncle. At the end of the first game, they had rescued a group of alien children from the evil Zoda who had destroyed their planet. This time around, Mike is trying to stop him for good. To do this, he must travel through time and collect tetrad blocks before Zoda can get them himself. The game opens up with a fairly lengthy story chapter. Of the NES games I've played, this is the most story-heavy one I've seen, with a fair bit of dialogue and some great close-up portraits of the characters. At the end of the chapter, Mike solves a cipher which transports him to prehistoric times. This was a very enjoyable story intro, but when the actual gameplay starts, it does so in the most annoying way possible. You're taken to an overworld map and soon come to a snowfield, which is full of pits to fall through. Invisible pits. When you fall through one of them, you'll be taken to a mini dungeon with a more zoomed in overhead view and have to fight some enemies before exiting back to the snowfield. This repeats ad nauseum. Walk a few steps, fall in a hole, fight some enemies. I went through that loop 5 times before I managed to get through the area. The experience of the first 10 or 15 minutes of the game really encapsulates the whole thing. It would do something fun and interesting, then immediately follow it up with something frustrating. Throughout most of the game's 9 chapters, the core gameplay loop involves traveling through an overworld map and talking to people to gather information on what to do next, then venturing into a dungeon or two to fight enemies, collect items, and defeat a boss. Once Mike finds the tetrad in each area, he's whisked to another point in time. Zoda's Revenge looks and plays very similarly to the first game, but some significant changes have been made. Mike can now move and attack diagonally, in 8 total directions instead of just 4. He's also got a lot more mobility in his jumping. Gone is his trusty yo-yo, and instead his main weapon is a throwable axe, which is eventually upgraded to a dagger and a katana. His psychic shockwave attack is also upgradable and gets stronger based on your current health. There are also a few other new limited-use weapons, like a 3-way shot. The stiff movement in the first game is something I've complained about. You can only move in 4 directions, and it forces you to move in straight lines, as if you were on a grid. While the change to allow diagonal movement and attack opens up new possibilities, it's not terribly easy to control with your basic NES D-pad, and the dungeons still seem to be built with the grid system in mind. Making diagonal jumps over water or obstacles always seemed to be a crapshoot. Sometimes they'd go as planned, and sometimes I'd jump too far or end up jumping in the wrong direction. In the original, movement and jumping was stiff and restrained, but reliable. Here, I had a lot more freedom, but rarely felt like I was fully in control. The dungeon design is visually similar to the first game, but adds some new features. Screens can be multi-level and often include raised platforms to jump onto. Enemies here can only be attacked if you get on their level or attack while jumping. Disappearing and reappearing platforms are abundant and can make for some challenging platforming. There are also a lot of conveyor belts, which will carry Mike in the direction they've been stamped with and can provide extra speed and extra challenges, especially when these are used during boss fights. The boss fights are some of my favorite parts of the game. There are some really clever ones that make the most of the platforming challenges introduced through other parts of the dungeons. In the sewers of London, there is a stationary blob that you have to circle around, attacking it in between jumping across disappearing platforms. In Camelot, there's a fight where you travel in a loop on a fast-moving conveyor belt as a mounted knight flies back and forth, shooting at you. Regular enemies in the dungeon aren't anything too interesting. Many are reskins of enemies from the first game. There are smaller, fast-moving monsters and larger, lumbering ones. Some fly and some shoot projectiles. I found the difficulty curve in the game was all over the place. It wasn't a gradual increase in challenge, but rather a whole lot of difficulty spikes. Taking damage in games is never fun, but Zoda's Revenge seems especially punishing when you get hit. Usually when you take damage in a game, you get a second or two of invulnerability so you can recover. Not here though. When you take damage, you're briefly stunned and can be damaged again almost immediately. It makes it incredibly hard to recover and get away from the thing that's just hit you. There were so many times I went from full health to almost dead in a matter of seconds because I just couldn't move out of danger once I took that first hit. To top this off, once you reach a certain health level, you're subjected to constant shrill beeping, reminding you that you're almost dead. There are ways to recover health. You can find small hearts to instantly refill some of your meter, and stars, which you need to collect 5 of before they take effect. Though I saw these at the beginning and end of the game, they were mysteriously absent in many of the chapters. What you end up relying on more are medicine jars, which are inventory items that you can use to restore 5 hearts. These are much more abundant than they were in the first game and limited to use in the dungeon where you find them. In the final chapter, you can collect a lot of medicine jars, and you should, to prepare yourself for an immensely punishing rush of all the previous bosses that you'll need to defeat again. I really liked the time travel aspect of the game as it gave the opportunity to visit a lot of different locations and people. The amount of story and dialogue presented really made the most of that. In Chapter 3, you end up in ancient Egypt, fetching a pizza for Cleopatra. Chapter 5 whisks us to the Italian Renaissance, where we talk to Da Vinci and a bunch of highly stereotyped Italian characters. Chapter 6's Transylvania gives the opportunity for a spooky level with skeletons and ghosts. The dialogue is funny in a really corny kind of way and keeps things interesting as well as providing some much needed downtime between dungeons. Visually though, I'm not too impressed. Considering this came out in 1994, it was one of the last NES releases, I expected an improvement over the first game's graphics. However, I didn't find that for the most part. The dungeon environments and enemy designs were about the same quality, and though traveling through time gave more variety in locations, few of them looked that great. The couple standouts in terms of visuals were the Italian overworld, which has some nice colors, and the close-up character portraits, though some are better than others. The music is also not the best. This may be partly nostalgia talking, but the first game's soundtrack was so catchy and memorable. Here, I couldn't hum a few bars from any track once I turned the game off. Zoda's Revenge is a roller coaster of highs and lows. Every time I started to really like the game, I'd be faced with a terrible level that was painful to get through. The game's intro is impressive and followed up with the snowfield full of invisible holes to fall in repeatedly. Egypt has amusing characters and story, and an awful maze that you need to go through mostly blind. The Italy chapter has a dungeon with some interesting timing-based platforming and unique enemies that you need to direct into a hole rather than fighting. And then a giant castle maze full of, you guessed it, invisible pits to fall into. As the game wraps up, fans of the original are given a real treat, and then punished with 9 difficult boss fights in a row. Zoda's Revenge is not a bad sequel, but it doesn't quite live up to the original for me. Though there are things I like about it, there's interesting boss fights, I like traveling to different times and places, and some of the dungeon layouts are fun. But taking any damage was overly punishing, and any level that involved mazes or invisible pits really drove me up the wall. The change to movement and controls tries to improve upon StarTropics 1, but doesn't quite succeed. I think it's worth giving the game a shot, though if I'm gonna be completely honest, if I hadn't committed to reviewing this game, I probably would have quit right around that first field of pitfalls. One last thing. Why in God's name is this called Zoda's Revenge StarTropics 2 instead of StarTropics 2 Zoda's Revenge? All that I ask is that I am able to keep my games in alphabetical order and keep series together. Is that so much to ask? If you want to see more, you can check out my review of the original StarTropics or another of my videos. I also have a Patreon if you want to support my content or get a chance to vote on future polls of what I should review next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.